So welcome to SanTan Solar's part 3 of our series of building your own off-grid system. Now, previously we've talked about your requirements, your power needs by doing a power audit and just finding out how much wattage you're going to be required to run and for how many days of autonomy you want to run. With that in mind, then you want to make sure you can size your battery, how much storage you're going to need for that wattage and that power requirements that you have from earlier. So now we're at the point where how big is an array of panels that we're going to be using? So the number of panels can be determined by several factors. One is the electricity that you're going to use, how much space you have in order to put these on your structure or your RV or camper, how much of amount of daily sunshine do you get, and of course the type of wattage of each panel. After knowing what we were going to consume, we would need to determine what usable sunlight that we're going to have. Just remember that a usable sun is not the same as how many hours of the day there are of sunshine, how many daylight hours there are. There's two different things, because you got to understand that morning hours in the morning, when the sun is starting to rise, you don't get a full sun on that. So that's not really considered a full day of direct sunlight, because it's only in the evenings and in the mornings it's going to be low to the horizon. Thus, it won't be giving you a lot of energy. So by the time the best energy is going to be from like noon to 1, where it's at its peak, that is the most usable daylight that you're going to have to run your panels. And your panels will then be at their peak. Keep in mind that also when you're determining the daylight hours that you're going to be having, this is also your location. A lot of times travelers or people who are going to be putting up panels might be further away from the equator. The closer you are to the equator, the more days of sunlight that you're going to have. Say, for instance, we're in the Southwest here. We get about an average of about a little over 5 days of sunshine, of usable daylight. Going further north in the United States, that number seems to dwindle just a little bit because your angle has to be turned a little bit further. Over here in the Southwest, we can have, your panels can be at a 20 angle. As you go further north, it has to tilt more because the sun is lower in the horizon. That'll also help you determine how much sunlight per day you'll get. Another thing you want to think about is your plan for the seasons, depending where you're located at. As I've mentioned before, here in the Southwest, we get lots of daylight. The winters are pretty mild, and we get pretty good sunshine throughout. So it's really nice in this part of the country. Now, when you start going to northern parts of the country, where the elevation might be a little bit higher and the seasons are more frequent, you'll have less days of usable sunlight. That means that your temperatures will be colder. It won't be as hot. So there's some trade-offs there. Colder the panels are, the more they produce. However, fewer days of sunshine. In the Southwest or in the South, where it's a lot hotter, high heat or high temperatures have a tendency to make panels produce less. However, they do have more days of sunshine to help balance that out. So just keep that in mind. The further away from the equator that you're going to be at, if you're traveling on an RV and stuff, you're going to get fewer days of sunshine, and that's just typical geography there. And of course, paying attention to your seasons. When you're traveling about or you're building a cabin up in the forest and what have you, you might be getting less, and there might be more shading because you're in a more hilly and mountainous areas. The more flatter it is, usually you have a little bit better clearance for sunshine hitting your panels. Now, we also want to keep, as you can see behind me, that panels come in different sizes and shapes and the amount of wattages that they put out. For instance, we have some 250s, 255s, and of course we have like 280s, and they get bigger as they go like 300 and up. That's in wattage. So they can have a tendency to be in taller, as this one back here is 285, and as opposed to the 250s, 240s, which are about this height. They're about 65 inches tall. This one's, of course, a lot larger than that. That comes to another thing of how you're going to mount these. Are you going to be putting them on the roof? Are you putting them on a shed, a barn? Are they going to go on top of a camper? Are they going to be ground mounted? That's also going to determine the size of your array. And when you're looking at the size of the array, you have to consider where it's going to be at. If it's going to be ground mounted, is it going to be higher up, or it's going to be lower down? Trees are going to shade it. You got to find optimal spots for that. If it's going to be on your roof or it's going to be on a shed, You can mount them on the shed so that, like air pipes, trees and antennas and things that are sticking up out are not going to overshadow some of the panels as the sun starts to wane or rise, depending on your location, of course. So a lot of wattages are determined on panels. How do they determine that? Standard testing conditions. That's called STC. And that STC is what's usually listed on the back of panels. Using that STC, it'll tell you what the VOC of each panel is. The VOC is, of course, what the open circuit voltage is. So basically, how much voltage can these put out without a load on them? That's the determining factor when you start adding them up. The ISC, which is the short circuit current, is basically telling you the amperage of each, how much amps each panel is going to put out. When you start placing power requirements, you've got your power needs, you start configuring your panels. How many panels in a string? Do I need 4 in a string, 2 strings? Do I need 5 in a string, 4 strings, or 4 panels, and so on and so forth? That also helps determine sizes and how big it's going to be. Another thing to keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier about wattage, is that these are like 250 watts. This is a 280. They got some that are even higher, like 400, 455, 410s, and what have you. Bigger panels. The more panels, the bigger they are, the more proficient they can be, because A, they can put in more cells. They can squeeze in more cells in a larger frame panel. That will be better performance. It does raise the wattage and the voltage is up. For instance, I have a 5 kilowatt system, okay, and you have 250 watt panels that you're going to use. They will require 20 of these, taking up approximately about 351 square feet. If you put them in like 5 panels in a row, 4 rows, you're looking at about 351 square feet. And of course, that's going to take 20 panels for 5 kilowatts of power. Now, say you're going to use something that's a little bit bigger, like say maybe a 410 watt panel. You're only going to need about, 12 of those panels. Now, they are a bit wider and bigger, but you're going to use fewer of them. And if you configure them to like 4 panels and 3 rows, you're looking at about 254 square feet based on its dimensions. So you can get smaller space with just the same amount of wattage for 5 kilowatts. Or you can use a lot of panels to achieve 5 kilowatts, but they're going to have more panels spread out. So that's something you might want to keep in mind. Now, of course, the bigger the panels are, the more cost it is. Depends on your budget. If you're looking for more budget things, budget-friendly panels, you can get some used ones. They are a great bargain here. And of course, you can get as many of those as you can, as long as you have the space. Okay, we did our power audit. We determined our battery storage. Now we have to account for, and we have to also account for like real-world losses. Generally, estimated to be around 15%. What I mean by real-world loss is the inefficiencies of the systems, because it's going to be hot, cold, wires. How much is that going to do? It's going to have some wire loss depending on how far away it is. Some panels, remember, panels will always put out 100% of what they are rated for. Like for instance, a 35 volt rated STC rated panel may not be putting out 35 volts. It might be putting out something close to like 34 or 30, 33. Just depends on how much sun it is, because that will vary depending on how much direct sunlight they're going to get on your location. So what size is that PV array going to be? So let's just say we have that 5 kilowatt system. Okay, so we have a 5 kilowatt system. We need to run for like 3.5 hours of autonomy. So we're going to have a 5,000 watt hour system. That's 5 kilowatt. And we want to run it for 3.5 hours. That's going to be about 1,428 watts. That's the size of your PV array. Okay, and then if you take that number and you plan for the inefficiency, so about 15%. So if you get a 1,428 watt array, and you put that efficiency, you divide it by that efficiency number, you're looking at 1,650 watts array size. Okay, that's, for instance, a 240 watt panels is what's going to give you that 1,650 watts. Sounds good, right? That's not too bad. 7 panels is not too bad, giving out that much wattage. Now, it's going to vary depending on what your user needs are going to be. You've already done your power audit, so if you need more, probably need more panel or higher wattage panels. Just depends on what you want to use, how you're going to use it, and the space that you have available. Also, your battery bank. Is it going to be a 24, 48, 12-volt battery bank. That's also going to be determining how many of these you will need. That means that when you have like say a 48-volt battery, you can pretty much put a lot of panels to that to feed it. Now remember, it has to be charged up by the panels that you're going to use, so you have to think about that as well. That's when we start determining how big our array is going to be by those figures I gave you. So keep in mind that when you are putting up panels, heat and cold do play a factor, and also you're determining your size. As we discussed earlier, where you travel to, if you're going to be up in the North Country where it's colder, panels will produce more but have less daylight, as we said earlier. So you want to take a look at that and keep that in mind. You can get a 35-watt panel, and then in the cold temperatures, even though you don't have much daylight, might be putting out 37 volts. They might be putting out some more output. And that's helpful because it does compensate for the lack of daylight that it'll have. Thus, it'll help you store things better. So once you've decided your panel size, how you want it mounted, you want to put it on a roof, shed, carport, ground mount, what have you, or you want to put it on your RV because it's going to be traveling in various shades is going to be happening. You have small panels, big panels. You'll be figuring that out to find out what your size of panel array is going to be. So for further help on this, you can just check us out, SanTan Solar. You can either speak to one of our sales reps or go online and see what our website has and kits that will already be pre-done to find out how much kilowatt usage you want to have. If there's any questions, feel free to call us, email us, and we'll be glad to help. Thanks again.